Welkom bij de She Biohacks podcast. Ik ben je host Dominique de Ruijter. In deze podcast combineer ik mijn twee grootste passies: biohacking en vrouwgerichte zorg. Laat je meenemen in verdiepende en inspirerende gesprekken met experts uit het veld. Neem controle over je eigen lichaam en upgrade je leven door gebruik te maken van vrouwgerichte biohacking tools. Let's begin. Hi, and welcome back to a new episode of the She Biohacks podcast. As always, I'm really grateful to have you here with us today. This is our first podcast episode in English, and I couldn't be more excited. This means our podcast will now be available for so many more people. Today, I'll be talking to Anna Heil. You can tell Anna is definitely a manifesting generator just by looking at everything she does in life. She is a ceremony facilitator, birth doula, holistic health coach, biohacker, functional nutritionist, and breathwork professional. And she guides people through their unique paths of personal development, helping them live healthier and happier lives. And today we'll be discussing themes like conscious pregnancy and childbirth, Anna's work as a birth doula, biohacking, and much more. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited.
Indeed, manifesting generator power.
Yeah.
I just can't do one thing only.
No.
Impossible.
Yeah, I checked it on your Instagram. Sometimes you have like a post of the manifesting generator thing, and you really can see that you're like a natural manifesting generator. So
Yeah, when I first found out about it, it just gave me so much more permission to be myself, because I always felt like, oh, I need to finish this thing and focus on that thing and not do a million things at the same time. And then I was like, okay, I think I can just do that.
yeah, I'm
Just
good.
embrace that.
I have the energy, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So before we head in on all these different themes about pregnancy, conscious childbirth, biohacking, etc., you work as a doula, as a birth doula. Can you tell us a little bit about what a doula does and how you came onto the path of doula or childbirth work?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe first how I got onto this path in the first place, because when I was pregnant with my first child, a dear friend of mine offered to be my doula. And to be honest, at this point, I didn't really know much about the potential. I knew doulas existed, but I didn't really know much about the potential benefits of having a doula, and definitely wouldn't have hired one for myself. But I cannot possibly put in words how much it brought me during my pregnancy, during birth, and also beyond, to have her by my side in this transition. And yeah, we're probably going to dive a lot deeper into this later on during our conversation. But this experience really shaped me, and I immediately knew I wanted to offer this kind of support to other birthing mothers as well, and just be there for other mothers in that process in the same way that she was there for me. So I enrolled in a professional doula training with Via Doula Amsterdam only a few weeks after giving birth, and I've been practicing ever since. And as a psychedelic ceremony facilitator, which I've been doing for much, much longer, I have developed a deep understanding of space holding and sacred space. And I believe that supporting a birth and facilitating ceremony is, in essence, the same work, even though it might not seem like that from the outside or from first glance. But what my role essentially boils down to in both settings is to create a safe space in which the process of ceremony or the process of birth can unfold in a serving way for whoever is journeying or for whoever who's giving birth. So, yeah, if you ask me, every birth is a ceremony and every ceremony is a birth of something new. And so, yeah, essentially, if you want to sort of boil it down to one task, I think the role of a doula during both pregnancy and birth and beyond is to be a space holder. And the word doula actually comes from the Greek language. So it's rooted in ancient Greek. And it literally means a woman who serves, or maybe loosely translated as a mother who mothers, or somebody who mothers the mother.
Mm.
And that's actually exactly the kind of image that I would like to paint in people's minds. Because especially on this journey of becoming a mother or becoming parents, there's so many challenges, so many unknowns, so many things that you might be doubtful about, or might just want to have somebody to talk about, somebody who's knowledgeable, who's experienced, who can guide you a little bit on this path. Because of course you've never done this before, everything is new, and even if you've done it before, it's always different. You know, every
Yeah.
pregnancy, every birth is just an entirely new plot, and also for the partner. So um, I don't want to say husband or
Hmm.
boyfriend, because of course there's also female partners, or um, birth partners that aren't necessarily in a relationship with a mother. But for the birth partner, whoever's going to be there to support the mother in this journey, but especially during birth, it can also be really nice to have somebody there who can explain how to best be of service and how to best support a birthing person. So that's really the role of a doula, is to really get to know the mother or the couple, or whatever constellation you might have during the pregnancy, to provide knowledge, to provide a safe space, and to then during birth really act as a space holder. And a doula isn't medically trained,
Hmm.
so she's not a midwife or not a doctor, but it is somebody who's really knowledgeable about birth and about pregnancy and everything that happens around that, and can support with a lot of non-medical practices such as acupressure and rebozo and moxa and massage techniques, and really above that, builds a super strong trusting relationship, which is incredibly important in a setting so intimate as pregnancy and birth. So I think that's really where the magic lies, especially in times where one-on-one midwifery care is super rare, not really available. Also, for a lot of people, not economically feasible. And that, of course, means that a lot of women don't actually know who's going to show up at their birth. Right? It might be somebody that they've never seen before. If they're in hospital, they might be giving birth through different shifts. So
Hmm.
different people might be coming in at different times. All of them they probably wouldn't have seen before. And that's a bit counterintuitive to the kind of space you're trying to create during childbirth, because of course you want to be in a space where you can fully relax and fully let go, and really feel safe. And that doesn't happen so naturally usually when we suddenly have people come in that we don't know and are in an environment that we don't know. So in a situation like this, a doula that you've met throughout pregnancy and gotten to know, who's gotten to know your body, who's gotten to know your baby, who's gotten to know your wishes, who's gotten to know who you are, and what your situation is, how you look at birth. Are you afraid of it? Are you looking forward to it? And so on and so forth, can really just almost be a rock, and be
Yeah.
somebody to support you in a whole different way.
Yeah.
And that I think that's really the role, to make the mother feel safe, to make her feel supported, and to make sure that she can give birth in an undisturbed and empowered way.
It's
And
yeah.
in during birth, I often see myself really almost as a guardian, or like a guard
Yeah.
dog of the space,
Yeah.
ensuring that everything's there that's needed, and that all that's not needed stays outside.
It's so beautiful, and I've yeah, during what you had to say, I had so many things coming up I wanted to talk about or ask you, but the first thing that comes in mind is like, isn't it what it's always been like within ancient communities? Isn't it like what was meant for us when we were like pregnant or like leading up to childbirth? Wasn't it always like within the group there were like certain other women who we can build on, who are there to guide us, who are there to answer our questions, who are there for mental support, who are there for ritual and ceremony? I think we just lost so much of this with the revolution in the medical world. And don't get me wrong, I think the medical world is really powerful, and it has some great benefits, but I think we also have seen like medicalization of pregnancy and childbirth, where the ritual and the ceremony and the holiness of pregnancy and childbirth are like almost forgotten. It's like not even a thing anymore. Because when I talk to people about doulas or like the work of a doula, I think more than 90% doesn't really know that there is even a doula. They just don't know it.
Absolutely. I'm fully there with you. Absolutely on the same page. And yeah, either people don't know what a doula is, or they think it's some hippie thing to do.
Yeah.
To have somebody at your birth who's gonna like make some offerings to the earth, which
Yeah.
by the way, I love doing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can
Most of my
imagine.
clients call me the medicine doula. Because I really, yeah, I see birth as a ceremony, and that's how I treat it.
Yeah.
But I think that's really, in essence, you captured it super well. An issue that we're facing in our modern society today, because of course it's beautiful that we have all these technologies and these medical tools to, if necessary, intervene because of course birth is naturally risky,
Hmm.
and it was not uncommon for women and children to pass during birth in the past. And there are, of course, moments where, for example, you might have to do a cesarean because otherwise the mother would bleed to death, or the baby wouldn't come out at all, or wouldn't come out fast enough. So there's a bunch of scenarios where this really helps. But I think the issue lies in the fact that and depending on where you give birth, the Netherlands, for example, is actually one of the countries that are always seen as like a prime example of a somewhat healthy birthing culture still, because women are given the choice. In a lot of countries, if you want to give birth at home, for example, first of all, you're seen as absolutely mad, and people will just be like, "What the hell are you doing? This is insanely dangerous," which is not true. There's actually scientific studies that show that it's just as dangerous or safe as giving birth in hospital.
Hmm.
But you don't even have the choice as a mother, because in a lot of countries, that one-on-one care or the midwifery care that would allow you to give birth at home simply isn't there, simply isn't provided. And I think that's also the most important thing when it comes to childbirth is, so there's no right or wrong, right? Like I wouldn't necessarily say it's better to give birth at home, or it's better to give birth in hospital, or it's better to whatever have a doula there, or it's better to not have a doula there. There's actually studies around that as well. We can get to that later.
Yeah.
But it's just about making the mother feel safe, whatever that means. And if a woman feels like she feels safe, it's about not objective but subjective safety.
Hmm.
So what do I need in order to fully relax, to fully let go, and to fully submit myself to the process of giving birth, and not submit myself to some medical system that's been established, and that I now have to sort of roll with, even though I don't understand it, or I don't really want to be a part of it until necessary. So I think that's something that often concerns me and concerns mothers. I, for example, have a really good friend now who will give birth in the US
Hmm.
very soon. And she also said, "Yeah, I think my birth would look very different if I was still in Europe. But the way things are here now in this specific region of the US that I'm in, I don't really have any other chance but to give birth in hospital." And then another point that you mentioned, which I thought was really on point, is that we don't really have that sort of tribe of women around us anymore. So maybe also elders that can teach us about birth, that can share their experiences with us, because birth is almost become a taboo topic in society, right? Most people I hear speak about birth, they share their negative experiences and how traumatized they are and how difficult it was. And I've actually asked a bunch of women that I knew had positive experience why they weren't sharing about them more, and they said, "I almost feel ashamed, or I feel like I might trigger other women who didn't have such a positive experience. So I'd rather not share because I don't want to, make them feel like they didn't do it right, or I don't want to sort of like load their anger and resentment and frustration and trauma onto me by sharing my positive experience." But I think through that, so much gets lost, so much wisdom, so much knowledge that used to be passed down from generation to generation, and that's now not really talked about so much anymore. So I'm really a big advocate of what my dear friend Kimberly Ann Johnson, who's a professional and also a very well-known um, author and speaker and teacher in this work, would call mother culture. So a culture where mothers really connect and they really talk about their experiences, good and bad, and they share their knowledge and their wisdom and the things that have worked for them and haven't worked for them and the options that you might have. And in that, mothers can really be educators for mothers to be,
Yeah.
and grandmas can be educators for their maybe even grandchildren
Yeah.
at some point.
Yeah. But
Um,
we are currently living in a society where our grandparents and our parents are like really focused on the medical system, and I think this is the first generation who tells like who's really skeptical about healthcare, of course. Yeah. So when we now ask maybe our parents, or for some of us grandparents, they might just tell us just go to the hospital, listen to the person in the white coat, he or she knows best. And I think we are like reclaiming wisdom again from our own bodies. What are our own bodies telling us? What is like we have like the insanely we have the insane the opportunity to Google online, to check online for different pathways and how we can focus on getting pregnant, or on childbirth, or on the postpartum period. Like what was the name? And John,
Kimberly Ann
Kimberly, yeah,
Johnson.
Kimberly Ann
Check her
Johnson.
out. Her
Yeah, yeah,
work is
I know
fantastic.
her work. I read her book, the Jaguar. I don't know.
Call of the Jaguar.
Call of the Jaguar, I think so. She talks about a lot about the nervous system. I really
Mhm.
love it, and about sexuality and about childbirth, and I really love it. Don't think I know her as well as you do, but I really love her work. Like um, giving a new perspective on all these different topics that are mostly like just talked about in isolation, and not like within the interconnection between those three. Um, but yeah when we go back to visit our parents, I don't always know, or I'm sure that they have also positive stories to tell about their um, birth stories. Because when I look at my mother had 6 cesarean sections, so it was like a lot, and she didn't really talk about it a lot. She just said, yeah, that's what it's had to be, and it's okay, and I'm all right, and I have like the worst abs right now, but it's okay.
Imagine.
So it's I think we, as like the current generation, are like still navigating on what do we want to believe and what is best for us. Is it like a part of the medical healthcare system? Is it a part of more like ritual sacredness, more like ceremony? Like, is it like completely the one or completely the other? I think we are like mixing the two with each other. How do you see like the combination of those two, like the giving back sacredness and ritual within this time, within this period of pregnancy and childbirth and postpartum periods, combining it with the regular healthcare system?
Mhm. Yeah, beautiful question. And I think what needs to be said here is that we live in extremely privileged times where we have both available. Because you were just talking about your mother's story, and when I look back at the women in my family, it doesn't really surprise me that they are now advocating for hospital birth, because my grandmother, so my mother's mother, almost died during a home birth, giving birth to my mother. And it was only a really skilled midwife that managed to save her life at the time, which, of course, hearing that story scared my own mother into, for sure, giving birth at the hospital. And when I announced to her that I was going to give birth at home, she thought I was absolutely crazy, and she tried to talk me out of it for 9 months.
Mhm.
And now, seeing that I've given birth at home multiple times successfully, she's kind of coming to a point where she's like, "Oh, actually, I'm happy to reconsider and revisit that opinion." But at the same time, of course, I always had the chance or the opportunity to go to
Yeah.
hospital if needed.
Yeah.
So I think that's also, what goes left, what goes right, and eventually meets in the middle.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's happening here is that, maybe 2, 3 generations ago, women didn't really have a choice, or not so much at least. And then that brought the women a generation or 2 ago, to really choose for that safety of complying to the medical system. And now we're realizing, because also there's a lot of people that feel like the medical system has failed them,
Mm.
that we're coming to a point where we're, yeah, starting to walk a good path, that allows us to integrate the 2.
Mm.
And that a lot of women are also realizing again, like, "Oh, okay, there are other choices." And if I inform myself, I can take my birth into my own hands a lot more again. I don't have to submit myself to this system. If I want to, I can,
Yeah.
but there's also other options. And I think that also automatically, sort of has us look at birth in a different way again, and at pregnancy, because it's become very medicalized, and as that very standardized and very sort of, yeah, like not very sacred, like you said.
Mm.
It's just something, and of course, in a way, it is the most natural thing, but it also is the most magical thing, and it's
Yeah.
the most incredible thing. So even as a mother of multiple children, like it's just wild to me that these children, when I look at them outside of my belly now, that they grew inside of me,
Yeah.
and that my body managed to push them out somehow. And yeah, I think it's a really beautiful, and that's also why I'm so excited when people are asking me about my work as a doula and are wanting to learn and wanting to understand, about this practice again, because it really feels like it's bringing, the birthing culture somewhat back into alignment again, where we notice that it can be insanely risky. And I'm sure every woman who's had complications during birth was incredibly happy to have the medical system as a backup support, but to at the same time really realize how sacred it is, how much of a natural process, how much we can trust our bodies, at least to a great extent, and to also, yeah, really celebrate that again.
Yeah.
And I think there's, um, yeah, just a lot of, women that feel like pregnancy just, and that's again sort of like a result of the system that we've created, that pregnancy simply has to happen on the side, right? Like you continue working until whatever, 2, 3
Mhm.
weeks before giving birth. It's kind of annoying because, birth is also not plannable. You don't really know when you're gonna give birth or how you're gonna align that with your work, and it's just not really a part, it's not really seen for what it is in our culture, let's
Mhm.
say. And I think we're on a good way to bringing that back though,
Yeah.
so I have hope.
Yeah, and yeah, I can already see that there is a lot of improvement within the regular healthcare, or in the conventional healthcare. So you see, although women still have childbirth within the hospital, they have like better rooms. They have like more dark rooms. They have like with the less of the aperture, and less of the beeping and whatever. And it was some time ago, someone also told me that they just had one person that would just come to visit them and come to check them, and not like with shift workers. They would like have had a nurse one, and then nurse two, and then nurse three. They have just one person, and that really helped. I think there is like a shift already in conventional care, so we can really like experiment with all the knowledge that we get in, and we have such an uh, advantage that we are able to, what you just told us, that we are able to like see these different possibilities and choose from whatever feels good to us. And it's, if I look at like pregnancy and childbirth, for me it's still a little bit traumatic, because I don't know how, but I grew up with the notion that childbirth was like really scary and was like really traumatic, and it's gonna like hurt like hell. And I the loss of control was like so. um, traumatizing to me. Back then, I was like 10, 11, 12 or something. And then me and my sister were like always laughing that she would become my surrogate mother. So she would like carry my children. I could, so I wouldn't have to birth them. And it was so weird. But then I worked a lot on these traumas. I think I got them from like unconscious patterns, or maybe from like the mother line or whatever. My mother really didn't really tell a lot about it. She was just like, it was okay, it wasn't always nice, but it was okay. So I couldn't really always like know like where does it come from, where does this fear come from. And later on I start working within women's healthcare, and I get all these women with all these traumatic births, and I get like all these women who have like all these pregnancy problems, and within this period, I started to really, I was like, by working on these traumas, I was like getting less anxious about it. But then again, I just heard all the traumatic and problematic things, and the things that could go wrong, etc., etc. And then I became like, again, really, I had a lot of anxiety, or like fear of becoming pregnant or childbirth or whatever. And then it like ha- um, was like an invitation for me to work on it more. So I worked on it more, and now I'm following like these Instagram accounts of I don't know what the name is, but I think it's like Vrije Geboorte and some other accounts. And then I see a lot of like beautiful ways to birth the child, and beautiful stories about childbirth and the postpartum period, but also pregnancy. And I just really was really cautious with the information I let into myself. I don't know
Mhm.
if I am not clear right now, but so I really try to look at the positive stories way more, and I wouldn't like let myself like be traumatized by all the traumatic stories, because when I listen to these stories, sometimes it was like you don't know the story of the person who's giving birth. You don't know what was going on before. You don't know what her health was. You don't know nothing. And then you get so scared, but like you hear all these different negative stories, and you think it's gonna be
Gonna happen
100%
to
sure
me.
that it's gonna be the same with me. But then and then you see these stories that like quite positive, or like really magical and with ceremony, and these are so beautiful. But it like it's so weird, because there are two so different expectations about childbirth, like the traumatic one and the magic one. Do you know what I mean with this?
Absolutely.
How is your experience with these two like stories about childbirth?
Mm. Yeah, first of all, I think you made a super important point about really being very careful and filtering very consciously as to what you allow to come into your awareness.
Yeah,
Because since we're on a biohacking podcast, I
yeah.
think a lot of the listeners will be very aware and very cautious with regards to what they put into their body, for example, right? So what supplements to take and what food to eat. And then it's just much more tangible, right? So if I eat junk food for a week, I'm gonna feel pretty awful. And then if I eat healthy for a week again, I'm probably going to feel better, have more energy, sleep better, and so on and so forth. But we often don't really see that connection when it comes to media consumption, for example, right? And also with all the social media platforms that we're using today, we don't necessarily get to filter so much anymore. Of course, we can choose who to follow, but still we're getting all kinds of ads and suggestions. And I think that's something to be very aware of. And that's also what I tell people before coming to ceremony, for example, is that even if our conscious mind isn't so concerned with a certain piece of information that we've consumed recently, our subconscious mind probably is. So, for example, if you watch a really scary movie before coming into ceremony,
Mm,
chances are you're probably going to relive at least a part of that, or it's somehow going to pop into your awareness again. And that, of course, doesn't just happen with singular exposure of such information, but especially with societal themes and societal traumas such as childbirth, where there's almost like a collective opinion
Mm.
these days that says childbirth is scary, childbirth hurts, and childbirth is awful, and it's such a burden to women, and I wish I was a man. That, of course, because you said you were 10 or 11, right? Like
Yeah.
it just started so early, when that's an age where, of course, like I'm a woman, I can have children one day, but it's not necessarily the time where you would already start sort of actively thinking about, do I want to become a mother? How's that going to play out? Is that going to be painful? Is that going to be too much to handle? But that collective story already sort of like trickles into our system as girls, and that already creates this baseline fear. And I think, I don't want to say it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, but what I see in a lot of women that I work with as a doula is that they have so many limiting beliefs around birth. And just like you, they don't really know where they come from, because they also say, like, oh, I don't know so much about the birth of my mother, grandmother, whatever, about my friends, maybe even. But it just seems like I have this negative baseline, or this negative sort of undertone of birth. And some women then kind of decide to not be pregnant at all, and never have children, simply because they're so afraid of that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's of course also the opposite movement that says, like, oh, childbirth is so beautiful and you can have a pain-free birth guaranteed if only you follow those steps, and only if you do hypnobirthing and whatnot.
Mm.
And I think that's just as misleading. But again, it's what goes left goes right.
Of course.
It's these polarizing opinions, and if there's one really strong pole on the one side, there's going to be the creation, just to keep that in balance, a really strong pole on the other side that emerges. And what I believe, again, coming back to mother culture, the issue here is that we don't hear any real talk about birth. So the first sort of girlfriend in our group of friends that gave birth at the time um, didn't really talk about her experience to us. And only later on, as we also became mothers, she was like, "Oh, I didn't really want to drop those bombs on you, and I didn't want to sort of like hit you with that real talk. And I just thought I'll wait until you guys have that experience for yourself, and then we can kind of level on that." I was like, "Oh, that's so sad," because she's actually somebody who's super honest usually, and just really out there with her opinion. And I was thinking, why don't we just get to share really honestly, and share that, yes, childbirth can be painful, and yes, childbirth can be really intense, but childbirth can also be really beautiful. And it's one of the biggest rites of passage that we as women get to go through. And it's one of the sort of biggest drivers of personal development, potentially, if you look at it in this way and if you accept it in that way. And it's both.
Mm.
And of course, there's people who have a pain-free birth, there's people who have a really painful birth. But if we're already going into the experience expecting it to be incredibly painful and awful, then chances are that you're probably going to be in freeze. You won't inform yourself about it. You're just going to be like, oh, I'm just going to have to wait and see what happens. There's not much I can do anyway. And then you end up, for example, not preparing yourself, which I can tell in my work, but also in my personal experiences. Over and over again, I've seen how incredibly important that is, and how much that can shape your experience. Not to say that you have to know everything about it, read every book, do every potential practice that can help you to have a positive birth, but I always feel like knowledge is power.
Yeah.
So if you know what might potentially happen, and also from a biohacking perspective, if you understand what your body is doing during pregnancy, but also during childbirth, what it has to go through, then we can better understand how we can, first of all, get out of our body's way, and then second of all, support it
Yeah.
in moments where we have the opportunity. And I think it's incredibly important that we as women, especially those that have had the experience, start talking about this again, and start talking about what has helped us, start talking about how it really was. And that's also the reason why I've always openly shared my birth stories. And I've actually had two incredibly beautiful births. And I'm not going to say they weren't challenging, not at all.
Mm.
Especially my first birth, there were moments where I was like, I don't care. Just get a knife, get this baby out of my belly, and I don't even want a baby. Just get me out of here. But this is also why it's such a rite of passage, right? It's not a walk in the park, but overcoming these moments and then coming back into your power again, being like, no, I can do this. This is
Mm.
what I'm meant to do, and I'm doing it now, and my body is strong, and my body is ready to give birth to this baby. This is so empowering as well, right? So
Yeah.
you go through valleys and you cross mountain ranges, and it's a journey.
Yeah.
And just believing that you're ready to take on this journey and not having yourself be discouraged by all of these stories of people who didn't believe they could walk this path and or maybe had a super challenge, because we don't know. Birth is a black box, right?
Mm.
So even if you prepare yourself well, it's not a guarantee that you're going to have the picture perfect birth, but chances increase. But it's like that with everything in life, right? Because and I think birth is actually a really beautiful sort of teacher in, like you already mentioned, letting go of control, which is
Mm.
something that's super scary to a lot of us. But I think it's mostly because we've created this illusion of control for ourselves. Because of yeah, in a temperature regulated room, in a country where I can just walk to the supermarket and get any kind of
Everything.
food at any time, no matter what season, and I can buy anything I might possibly desire and have it delivered to my door same day. We just kind of feel like we can have it all, and we can always have everything exactly the way we want it, and everything is in our control. But
Mm.
control is just such an illusion, and that's what I feel like birth teaches, ceremony teaches as well, which is why they're so similar. And honestly, for myself, I'm so grateful that I did so much medicine work and so much ceremony work before giving birth for the first time, because it really sort of reminded me of that feeling of full surrender and full trust that you sometimes need to embrace during ceremony and during
Mm.
intense experiences in that realm, and gave me so much confidence that I could walk this path of childbirth. And when I now look back at sort of that whole journey of pregnancy and birth and motherhood, I mean, I don't need any more children. We're already outnumbered by our children. I don't need to be pregnant anymore. I really enjoy having my body for myself, and I gave birth 5 months ago again, and I'm currently recovering, and I'm just so grateful every day to feel a little bit better, to be a little bit stronger, to be able to do a few more things again that I couldn't do last week. But if I could give birth again, oh man, hell yeah, I would give birth again 100 times. I think it's just the most magical thing.
Yeah.
That's my personal experience, and I don't want to again trigger anybody who didn't have a beautiful birth, but I think it's important to also share those stories. And I'm not sharing it from a point of
Look at
this
me,
was
like, yeah.
a walk in the park, and look at me, I did it so perfectly, and it's so easy. What are you guys complaining about? Hell, it's not easy, but it's worth it. And I
Mm.
think it's one of the things that has helped me grow the most in my life. And sort of coming out of every birthing experience, I just felt like, man, if I can do this, I can do anything.
Yeah.
So and that's why it's a rite of passage. And there's so many tribes, because we were speaking about ritual and about sort of ancient traditions and the way our perception on birth has changed in our modern culture. And there's a lot of tribes that really do see and acknowledge birth as a rite of passage that's almost like naturally inwoven in a woman's life. And they almost artificially create similar rites of passage for men, because they understand that
Mm.
men don't really have that sort of come naturally to them in life. So they really need to, by the elders, by their fathers, by their grandfathers, be put through an intense situation or an intense ritual. Um, and you see this over and over again in all kinds of cultures, in all kinds of places around the world, to sort of make that transition, archetypally speaking, from boy to man, or from whatever, the lover to the father, whatever you might want to call it,
Mhm.
and sort of, let's say, the free roaming masculine that's naively exploring the world, and all they have to care for is themselves,
Mhm.
into uh, the role of a caretaker, somebody who takes responsibility,
Mm.
somebody who's aware of the consequences of their actions. And the same, of course, goes uh, holds true for mothers, or for women coming from, let's say, the virgin archetype into the mother archetype. And I'm not trying to say that you have to become a physical mother to make that transition, but it's definitely sort of an act, or yeah, a rite of passage that comes on your path as you become a mother, that really changes you.
Yeah.
And also, again, like linking back to the biohacking perspective, there's so many things, or not necessarily just biohacking, but the, let's say, human health or
Mm.
um, yeah, physical perspective of it. That there's so much research these days that shows that, for example, the brain structure of a woman who undergoes pregnancy and childbirth changes drastically and changes for good in some ways.
Mm.
So some areas of the brain shrink and some others increase in size. And there's even a word that's been coined couple years ago, I think somewhere in the 70s, 80s, which is rising in popularity now, which is called matrescence.
Mm.
And it's a super fascinating thing to study. And there's even matrescence coaches these days, because what's being understood is that women, as they're becoming mothers, so as they're undergoing pregnancy and childbirth, they almost enter a second puberty, hormonally speaking, and with all these changes that are happening in their bodies, but also neurologically in their brains. And that, of course, maybe that's an important point to make. It's like, hey guys, if we seem a bit hysterical or over emotional or whatever we get labeled as during pregnancy and in the postpartum period, then that's fully normal, because it is really a huge change
Yeah.
that we're undergoing as expecting mothers. And just kind of having that in mind and seeing what it does, not just to our bodies, but also to our psyche, to our emotional body, to our spiritual body, it just kind of, yeah, shows like, hey, that yes, it's intense, and
Yeah.
yes, it's awesome. It's both,
It's yeah, it's everything. And I think I talked about this a couple of weeks ago about the different stages of a woman's life. And we know that when we hit puberty, we change, and we don't just change physically. Yeah, we don't just change within the body, but our brain changes. It is like prepping us for a new person with maybe a better understanding of what's life all about. And then when we go into pregnancy and childbirth, postpartum, we see like a second hit of puberty. We have like this entire neuroendocrine transformation, and it is like really transforming our entire body and brain and nervous system again into a more developed person. And then we go into perimenopause and menopause, and we have like a third like puberty where we have another full on neuroendocrine transformation, and we like develop yet again into another person. It's like it is like we are this person, but we are different different parts. We are becoming different parts of ourselves, and through all these different stages. And I that's why I have a little bit of a problem with childbirth. And you mentioned this the beginning of this podcast. Like it's like you have like a side hustle. Like you
Yeah,
are pregnant,
that's what
but
it feels like.
yeah, yeah, you are like pregnant, and but you're also like working. You have like maybe a family. You do all these things, and yeah, you are pregnant. And then within like 3 weeks maybe before you have like kind of planned
Pregnancy
your
leave.
birth, then you will have some time. And then after a couple months later, you are already like back in the game. And it's such a like an isolated and narrow perspective on childbirth and about the whole entire process that lives and rises during this period. And I am not I haven't experienced this myself before, but I feel it in every cell that this is so much more than just like you're like birthing a child. It's amazing. It doesn't really sound like just birthing a child, but you are birthing a child and then you get back on the horse and you go to work and la 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 la. It's like so much more than that. um and I think we are like now just like exploring these fields of what is all happening within the female body throughout these periods, because 20, 30 years ago we weren't really like examining, and we weren't really researching the female brain and the female body during pregnancy, during childbirth, after childbirth. But even
At
if
all,
at
actually.
all, at all, no, we just didn't. We just thought like women are like small men with
Men with
boobs.
boobs.
Yeah, for real. And now I just saw like this morning I saw an article from Lisa Mosconi. She's like really big into researching the female brain, and she's also really like focused on Alzheimer's, where but Alzheimer's, uh, um, women's Alzheimer's. So she is studying like because a lot of women, far more women, get Alzheimer's than men, and then she studied what is happening, and she had like her research about the first brain imaging, I think, about like a female brain during menopause. It's like really, really, really interesting. I didn't really read the article yet because we had this podcast, but it's really interesting, and I really am so enthusiastic about everything that's coming up just now. But it is just coming up right now. We have like so many generations that were like thinking it was just a side hustle and it was just like childbirth and get back on the horse, right? But it isn't. And I also wanted to ask you about, you were telling like you are like in recovery of your last childbirth. I really want to ask you how, it's like a really big question, but I think you can answer it. Um, what can we do as like people who want to become a mother once, or maybe even already have children, but just want
Mhm.
to learn? What can we do to prep, to mindfully prep pregnancy, childbirth, and to also be really mindful about the periods after childbirth. So the whole postpartum period. What is your perspective on this? What do you really like advise? Maybe share some tools or like tips. I know it's like a really big question, but maybe share some of your experiences or like your tools that can help women navigate this like magical period.
Mhm. I'll do my very best to answer in a structured way. If there's anything at all that I'm missing out on, or if you have any other questions, in addition to what I'm saying, then
Yeah.
please jump in.
Yeah.
I think, because there's so many questions in one, but
Yeah.
maybe to keep it somewhat structured, it makes sense to look at it, from a, let's say, physical, a mental, emotional, and spiritual perspective. So looking at the physical body, which we've spoken about quite a bit, our mental body, our emotional body, our spiritual body, and to kind of look at what happens there and what can be done. And also, this is not to make anybody feel bad that didn't get the chance to prepare consciously for childbirth or conception. I mean, my first child was a sneaky babes that just snuck into my womb without me being able to really prep for that. But if you do have the chance, it is actually something that can be very nourishing, especially for yourself to kind of sit with that for a little bit and to understand the levels at which this transition takes place and also the immensity of that transition, which we somewhat sense and we can't really understand until we undergo it, but it still makes sense to kind of sit with it for a bit. And on a physical level, of course, a pregnancy is one of the toughest things that a female body can do, because for 9 months or longer, you're basically sharing all of your incoming nutrients, prioritizing the baby at all times, and also at the same time fighting hard to not only not reject genetic material inside of your system that is not your own, but to instead nourish it and help it grow, which results in a lower immune response, for example, and also as the baby grows, an increasing structural imbalance, less room for all your vital organs to move, including your lungs, shortness of breath, and all of these classic side effects that people talk about. It's a real thing, right? And then potential birth injuries and recovery, as I'm undergoing right now. And it's wild when you really look at what happens in such a short period of time. So going from being not pregnant to being 9 months later so pregnant that you almost feel like you're about to burst, and then giving birth and just from one minute to the other having no more baby inside of your belly, being whatever 6-7 kilos lighter within a few minutes, and then just kind of having to navigate the recovery of all of those changes that have happened. And for example, just looking at the pelvic floor, which is of course a very important muscle in the whole process of pregnancy and birth, it takes around 2.7 years on average to come back into its original shape and function. So yeah, I guess you get the gist. It's physically speaking absolutely no joke to be pregnant. Um, so it does make sense to, if possible, get into the best possible shape that you can before pregnancy, right? So balancing out your hormones, your any nutrient deficiencies that you might have, ideally also detoxifying your system, because everything that's in your system will end up in the baby system. And yeah, your body really puts an imprint on your baby's body for the entire duration of the pregnancy. And nowadays, we see so many babies already being born with things like diabetes, um, and and it's wild. But that really shows that you as a mother have. And again, this is not to make anybody feel bad, but it's just the reality of things, right? Um, so the better shape that you're in physically as you're entering a pregnancy, the better you will do. And also the better the baby will do. So it really makes sense to, if you have the time, yeah, really, really take that seriously. And of course, also afterwards, if you're planning on breastfeeding, then you're still nourishing an ever growing baby with your body and with all the nutrients that you consume for another at least 6 months before any solid foods are being introduced. And then for many women, way, way beyond that. And it's not uncommon also for women to end up with massive deficiencies and yeah, just really, really weak bodies postpartum and post breastfeeding. So yeah, my number one tip is just get into good shape if you can. And personally, I mean, my sneaky babes that came sort of I conceived after coming back from the Amazon rainforest, where I sat in diet with one of the indigenous tribes in Brazil for 2 months, and I didn't drink water for 30 days. I barely ate any food. It's sort of part of that spiritual diet that I was doing there, working with plant medicines. So I mean, physically speaking, I was probably in the worst shape to possibly get pregnant in these 2 months. I think I lost like 7 or 8 kilos. So I was underweight. I was definitely very nutrient deficient, and still I got pregnant. Um, that was actually a reason why I didn't realize for quite some time that I was pregnant, because I was like, oh, I lost my period, but that's probably because my body is really stressed and really deficient of all of these nutrients, which kind of needs to come back into balance. Um, but yeah, so ideally, I would have prepared in a different way, and if I feel I could have made the choice consciously, I would have become pregnant at a different point. Um, so even if this happens to you in a moment where you feel like, oh, my body is not in the best possible shape, then it's also not too late. It's not like, ooh, now I'm pregnant and now I can't do anything about it anymore. But of course, you can take all kinds of supplements and just really make sure to nourish yourself well during pregnancy, to treat yourself or to treat your body like a temple, as they would
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, and just to yeah, of course people get pregnant in like the most crazy situations. I've got a lot of women who came here who told me they got pregnant under circumstances that they wouldn't really think that they could get pregnant, so that's why they thought, oh, it's okay, but then they got pregnant. And these babies also are really healthy babies. It's not that we have like that if we might could consider better preparations, that the child in itself, if we didn't really were like really focused on our health, etc., that the child is by itself not healthy at all. but
No, no,
but
no. The human body is so resilient. It's
yeah, it's
ridiculous.
so resilient. But you told us earlier in this podcast, preparation is so it just decreases the chances of getting problems or like deficiency, etc., and it just helps you like navigating through this period of pregnancy and then the postpartum period, because during this postpartum period you were talking about like breastfeeding, but also like the sleepless nights for some of the parents. It's still like a hard hit on the body, and if we were like in a really good shape before we got pregnant, we will be in a better shape when we get in that postpartum period, and we really do need it. And I think what I see a lot in practice, I see a lot of women who do have a desire to have children, but then they are not really like prepping, because they think, when I get pregnant, then I'll be like doing all these
Then I'll
things,
stop smoking
yeah,
and
then I'll
stop
stop this,
drinking and
etc. But I also see a lot of women who like say, yeah, we have a desire to have children, but they are still on like contraceptive methods, like hormonal birth control, etc. And they don't really even know what is going on with their cycle. They aren't really prepping until they just say, now we want to have a baby, and now we are stopping with hormonal contraception. But a lot of people don't really know that the hormonal contraception methods, like especially the pill, do have consequences for pregnancy, and do have consequences with deficiencies like vitamin B, like vitamin D3, like magnesium. They have like a negative impact on the gut. So it's I think what I wanted to say is, I think a lot of people are like, I want to get pregnant, or we want to have a child. So now, when we are wanting to have a child, then we will start. But I
mm,
think it's like even earlier than that, because if we want to have like a healthy pregnancy and a healthy, yeah, we want to optimize our childbirth and postpartum periods, it's maybe even better to prep in advance, even before you get pregnant. What is your take on this? And I also wanted to ask you, no, maybe it's a better question for later, because it's a different question, like with ceremony. But just for now, what do you think of like prepping before even getting pregnant?
100%. Yeah, maybe just that's maybe just to first of all round off, because we
Yeah,
yeah,
of
well, ties
course.
in with
Yeah,
the
yeah,
with the
yeah,
physical part that we
yeah,
spoke about. There's so much more, of course, but maybe
yeah,
just to also finish that off
yeah.
in a moment. But yeah, physically, that and I mean, again, there's so many layers to this, but it's definitely a super good idea if you know you want to become pregnant at some point and have a child, to really not rely on that happening super fast and naturally if you're not living in alignment with how you would live during pregnancy, ideally. So, again, you mentioned contraception already. I, for example, which I'm actually very angry about, but it's also based on, you know, back then there's not being a lot of awareness of the consequences, and yeah, also my mother had no idea, to be honest. So I was put on the pill when I was 14, and I took it for around 10 years, maybe even longer. And when I stopped taking it, and I was at the time supporting my body with a lot of supplements because I kind of like gained that awareness, and I was like, hey, I'm really going to make a change and um, come back to my natural cycle and allow my body to heal. And still, it took me 9 months to even have a period at all. And then until it was regular, it took at least a year.
Mm,
And of course, again, there every journey is different. There's some women that come off the pill and then like the next month they have a super regular period. But still, there's so many deficiencies that it creates, so much chaos. So even if on the outside you're producing a regular cycle, doesn't mean your body is fully recovered on the inside.
yeah.
Um, and of course, also let's say if you're smoking, the residues, the toxins, they stay in your system for quite some time, and your body needs time to recover. So if you have the chance to sort of come back into a healthier way of living upfront,
Yeah.
amazing. We can maybe talk about a few things that yeah, you could do. You
Mm,
already mentioned, for example, gut health. That's a really important one uh, to to sort of optimize ideally. Maybe you have some podcast episodes around that. I don't want to go into too much detail with
yeah, of
everything because
course.
I
No,
feel
of
like we could
course.
talk about everything for hours.
Yeah.
Again, we mentioned bringing your hormones into balance, really focusing on a balanced diet of whole foods. So, cutting out, of course, alcohol, smoking, processed foods, all of these things, sugar, then also anything that your system might not agree with so much. A lot of people, for example, struggle with gluten, struggle with lactose. So, whatever it might be for you, yeah, might make sense to take a look at those things. Optimize your sleep. Sleep is
Mm,
such a big one that people really underestimate, especially when it comes to fertility. Um, there's also prenatal vitamins, if you sort of want to go the extra mile, that you can take to already prepare your body for the kind of nutrients that it will be needing for pregnancy or for conception, to bring your body into an optimal state in order to conceive. And I think what's also really important to know is that it makes sense to continue this for a while. So these changes don't happen overnight and also don't happen in like 3 to 4 weeks. So the egg, let's say, if I'm about to ovulate as a woman, that sort of jumps now, was an egg that started ripening 3 months ago. So that whole cycle takes around 100 days,
Yeah.
give or take. So if I now, whatever, start eating healthy and continue that for 4 weeks and then fall back into my old patterns, of course, I've done something, but it's not necessarily going to show results right away. So being like, oh, I tried that for a month, didn't really work, still didn't get pregnant. Yeah, that's not really, let's say, the right attitude to have. It does require some patience, and it does require some sort of pulling through. But yeah, any sort of underlying issue that you might have, if you have PCOS, endometriosis, these are of course some more severe
Mhm.
conditions that might make it difficult for you to get pregnant, but absolutely not impossible. Um, there's many stories of women with these kinds of conditions that have come to a point where they have either driven them into full remission, or where they were able to just find a better way of living with those and having children nonetheless. But all of that, if you can, just try and get it under control as much as possible. And some people even go as far to do genetic testing to see what kind of preconditions do I have, how much of a match am I with my partner. And this is, of course, again, like the
The
cherry on the top
biohacking,
if you
yeah.
really want to spend the money
Yeah.
and know exactly. But of course, yeah, childbirth or conception and pregnancy is also a natural process. There are very rare exceptional cases where there's literally a genetic mismatch between two partners. But that's, I wouldn't
Mhm.
say almost unheard of, but it like, don't necessarily assume that that's the case for you and your partner.
No.
Um,
It's
so
it's
yeah, but
it's
that's the
with that, like there is something that drives us to each other, right? So I think it's and they have researched that we respond different to people when we are on contraception pill, like the
mhm.
combination pill. So I can imagine that when we when we get a partner when we're on the pill, maybe because it's also nature. Maybe it even has like also an effect on the genetic match, because when we are like not on the pill, we are not influenced, and we have like this connection with someone. It's like also like biology. It's not just like he or she dresses like nicely, he or she is a great smile or something. It's like also biology. So I can imagine that when we have like no factors that are inhibiting this like biological process, I think the mismatch, the genetic mismatch, is like even less relevant, or even, yeah, like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many stories of women quitting the pill and suddenly feeling really appalled by their
Yeah,
partner, just
I
not
had
being able
that.
to
Yeah.
stand their smell anymore, and really kind of noticing that genetic mismatch, because hormones are so powerful. I always
Yeah.
call them the secret rulers of our body. And if we mess with those, we mess with our entire system. We mess with our perception of the world.
Yeah.
So if we then come back into balance, and I think for women, they even sometimes call our cycle the sixth vital sign. So a woman
Mm.
that doesn't have a regular healthy cycle, pain-free, I should also say pain-free regular cycle, um, that is a sign of a potential health issue. And because that should be a given, right?
Mhm.
And if we mess with that, then we're messing with our entire being.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think point is made.
Yeah.
Take care of your physical body as
Yeah.
much as possible. I think mentally we also mentioned quite a bit already. So we talked about matrescence. There's a lot of changes going on in your system. It's a huge shift, and yeah, we temporarily turn into teenagers again. So just anticipating that and understanding there's a lot happening on our sort of neurological level, and also, in terms of preparation, mentally really informing yourself about what is going on in my body, how can I best support my body, how can I get out of my body's way. So, for example, pushing through and trying to, make everything happen and keeping all the balls up in the air during your first trimester, while your body is not just making a baby, but also making an organ and kind of adjusting to the new hormonal state that you suddenly find yourself in. It's just not a good idea. And by trying to kind of live on your life that you've had all this time before you got pregnant might just not be possible during pregnancy. And these are some ways in which we can support our body without really doing anything in additional, but actually doing less, kind of getting out of the way of our body doing its thing. And so the more you know, the more you understand what's actually happening on the inside, the more you also, for example, talk to other mothers and their experiences, talk to professionals, read books, watch videos, listen to podcasts. All of that is beautiful mental preparation that will help you have a better experience. And ideally, if you can already do that up front, perfect. And then emotionally, well, we keep hearing these stories as well, so that shouldn't come as a surprise, but that women are emotionally unstable during pregnancy, maybe experience a lot of joy, a lot of it's just a roller coaster of emotions. And that makes sense because, yeah, first of all, again, we're finding ourselves in a moment of hormonal shifts, intense hormonal shifts, probably more intense
Than
than we've ever
ever.
experienced before.
Yeah.
Exactly. And also, of course, it's a kind of transition in our system senses that can't be reversed, because no matter what kind of decision you make in life, at least that's how I always see it. If you decide to move to a new place, you can always move back. If you decide to be with somebody, you can always break up. But this is the kind of shift that you can't reverse. If you have children, you have children. And even if you decide to not be in touch with them or give them up for adoption, energetically or speaking in family systems, they're always your children. They're always there. The energetic line is always there. And it's a decision that you can't reverse. And in family constellations, they also, even if you have a miscarriage, for example, or um, even if, again, the child doesn't end up being or playing an active role in your life, still, these children that you conceived at one point or the other, um, they are part of your family system. Like, we do recognize these days, and I mean, ancient cultures and traditions have recognized this a long time ago, that they are part of your story. They are part of you. They are part of your family constellation, your system. Um, so it's really a very intense transition to be navigating, and to be emotionally unstable, and to also maybe it's, of course, again, also a big question of, did I want this pregnancy? Did I not? Did I expect it? Did I not? But even if you're super happy to become a mom and you're feeling extremely joyful, most likely also there's going to be a lot of fears, a lot of doubts. Am I going to be a good mother? Am I going to manage financially? How's it going to be? I'm not going to be able to, for example, sleep. I'm not going to have so much time for myself. How am I going to navigate this with my career? These doubts are completely normal, because your life is going to change for good. You're not going to be able to go back to what it was. Um, and also, it's a big unknown. It's like a black hole. You have no idea. Something else is going to come, but you have no idea of really understanding what that's going to look like. So of course, it's an emotional roller coaster. Um, so also embracing that and really allowing that to happen, feeling these emotions, looking at them, and asking what they want to teach us, is so potent. And I have experienced this for myself, but I also have spoken to so many mothers that really feel like even just the period of pregnancy, like let alone birth, has been such a powerful catalyst for personal development, because all of these fears, all of these emotions, they're really at the surface. All of these loops and patterns and belief systems and ideas that we have about ourselves and who we're supposed to be and how life is supposed to go, all of these are really sort of like bubbling up to the surface and are asking to be looked at and asking to be worked with. And it's going to be super overwhelming. But if you kind of step into pregnancy with a willingness to do the work, you can really come out at the other end feeling extremely enriched and transformed by it. And not to say that, pregnancy is going to like bring all of your problems up to the surface for you to fix. And then afterwards you're like, done. It's like, cool. But it does hold a lot of potential. And then spiritually, you're of course not just sharing your physical body, but also your aura and your field, right? So, and in many traditions, they also say that the birthing mother literally becomes a portal for another soul to incarnate through her physical body. And they believe that the mother during childbirth has to travel to the spirit world to fetch the soul and to kind of bring it back across the veil and
Mm.
bring it into this physical existence. And I, again, really feel like I've experienced that myself. Especially giving birth to my daughter 5 months ago. It was such a wild experience of feeling so out of my body and really almost floating above my body and looking at it sweat and looking at it work and looking at it suffer. And I mean, like, whoa, okay, I'm just completely detached from that, and at the same time feeling so embodied and so in it. So it's really, yeah, it's really this insane navigation between these worlds, right? Between the
Mm.
spirit world and the real physical, um, fully embodied act of being in labor and giving birth, and that combined is wild. And I think, yeah, this really paints a beautiful picture of the magnificence and the immensity and almost impossibility, but also spiritual profundity of this task. And which again really turns it into a true passage. Um, and so there's already a big spiritual aspect to it as well. And many women, and again, including myself, feel like they often already make contact with the children that they later on birth, or maybe also won't birth, long before they actually become pregnant. And during pregnancy, many women say that again, because you're not just sharing your physical body, you're sharing your field, you're sharing your aura, you're sharing your whole presence. That certain characteristics that they later see embodied as character traits in their child that they see growing up around them suddenly feel embodied in themselves. So, for example, a woman that usually wouldn't be able to hold her boundaries so well during pregnancy might actually feel more able to do so, to later on see like, oh, I birthed a child that had or has insane sense of boundaries and can really hold their own super well. So it's a really wild sort of journey to be on. And one book that I can recommend for whoever it resonates, because of course people lie on different spectrums, and some really want to focus on the physical, and others think the spiritual is also interesting and relevant. One book that I can recommend in this uh, sort of spiritual realm is called Spirit Babies, and it's all about sort of making contact with the children that you are supposed to have, or the children that might want to reincarnate through you, if that's something that resonates. It's a really interesting book.
I noted it. I love it. When you told us like during childbirth, you really have to like go to the spirit realm and like catch your baby or like bring the soul into the body. It I resonated so much with that. My body like is all like vibrating, and I can really like feel it. It's so crazy. I think I don't know it's if it is like the plant medicine ceremonies or what it is, but I have not been a mother within this life, but some things I can like really feel. I don't know how I have to I have to explain this, but I can like really feel the spiritual part of it, or like I know I have to go through it to really experience it. Of course, it's like such a big, massive thing, but I can already like touch something about of it. Like, what is it going to be like? No, not what is it going to be like, but the energetic and the spiritual connection with
Frequency
it.
of
Yeah,
it, yeah.
frequency of it is like really, really special to feel like that. You talked about like ritual and ceremony in preparation for childbirth or
Mhm.
maybe even pregnancy. Can you go into that a little bit deeper? Like, what do you mean with ceremony and ritual, and how can we like implement it within the preparation of childbirth?
Mm. I would say, I mean, the pregnant the ceremonies that I spoke about were plant medicine ceremonies,
Oh,
because that's something that really works for me, and I think that's an important point to make from the start. There's so many doors to that same room, right? To, let's just call it, altered states of consciousness. Um, And some people find that in yoga, some people find that in meditation, some people find that in conscious movement, in ecstatic dance, in drumming, in hot and cold exposure to, speak to the biohackers. There's so many ways in which you can really enter these trance states, let's say, or if we, for example, talk about cold exposure or sauna, those can also really be uh, very intense physical experiences that push you to your limit, where you might feel like, oh, it's too much. I can't push through this. I can't stay in for a second longer. And then you do, and it teaches you something about yourself. It teaches you something about your resilience. It teaches you something about your boundaries, your capacity, and so what I'm trying to say in essence is there's many ways to kind of get to these realizations or get to these embodied states of feeling capable. Um, and to me, and again, these medicines or ceremony in general, they're there for everyone, but not everyone's for them.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's a good way of saying it. Um, They really, amongst many other things, teach, like I said before, they teach surrender. They teach loss of control. They teach trust. And that's something that was incredibly helpful for me to undergo over and over and over and over and over again before I gave birth. And not to say that I wouldn't have been able to give birth without having had those experiences. It was just that throughout my birthing journeys, in many many moments, I was like, oh, I've been here before. I've been at this, and whatever, running an ultra marathon, or um, I mean, I gave so many other examples of what other practices might lead you there. There's it just almost gives this trust in yourself that you're able to navigate difficulty.
Mm.
And I think that's a beautiful experience to have had, because, of course, you're going to come to a point where you doubt yourself, where you feel like you can't do it. It's too intense. Um, yeah, you just don't feel your physical capacity anymore. But of course, and coaches, so sports coaches, say this to you all the time. It's like, hey, you have a different mental capacity and physical capacity, and of course, your body is smart. It's trying to not get you to exhaust yourself. So way before your physical capacities end, it starts saying like,
Mm.
maybe a little bit too far. I don't know. Like, I don't think you should go here. I think you should take a break.
Mhm.
But then as you're giving birth, there's no taking a break, because people always compare it to, for example, running a marathon, right? And I've run a marathon before and I've given birth before. And I'm like, yeah, I see the similarities, but it's also completely different in the sense that, if I'm running a marathon, I know exactly what's expected. I know exactly how to prepare myself. I can stop at any time if I feel like it's too much after all. I can just quit or whatever, take a rest and drink some electrolyte water and then run on. And with birth, you just have no idea what's expecting you, right? It could be 3 hours, could be 30 hours. Um, there's no real option to just sort of like quit it and pick it up again later. There's no option to be like, oh, you know what? I don't think I'm doing this today. I'm just gonna, you know, um, let go of that for a moment. Maybe not have that baby. Um, it just happens, right? And you have to surrender to it. You have to be in it, and that's why I think it's such a powerful teacher. And that's exactly what ceremony does, or ceremony teaches, because you're just in this psychedelic experience, and of course, it's gonna end, and
Mhm.
the same with childbirth, at some point the baby's gonna come and it's gonna be over, but that's about as much as you know. You don't know how the journey is gonna unfold, you don't know how long it's gonna take exactly, you don't know what's gonna come up, you don't know, whether you're gonna, feel joy and feel bliss, or whether you're gonna, have moments of doubt and fear, maybe even panic. It's just all open.
It is
And
it is such a different it is such a different situation when I'm in a plant medicine ceremony and when I'm like training like really hard or like exhausting myself like physical or something. It's so different. I was like before I had my first plant medicine ceremony, I was like I would not stop when I was training. I would just go to complete exhaustion. I could do anything. I could do like fasting. I could do like ice baths. It was no issue. But then I went into my first plant medicine ceremony. I was like, no, no, no. I really don't want to do this. I really don't want to do this. And it was just like hours of like, I really don't want to go into this. And it's actually really beautiful because the plants have like an intelligence, right? It's like way more intelligent than than my brain can even comprehend
Comprehend.
comprehend. So um it's I believe that it's not the same like with childbirth, but it's like really letting go. And it was like a sort of letting go I hadn't really experienced before, because with all the different things you can say stop it, I don't want it, but with plant
Mm.
medicine ceremony you can't just say like, oh no, stop it, I want to go out, just want to have a break, I'll come back to this.
Like, break
um
from what?
yeah, what? It's just you're in there and you have to go through with it, and it scared the shit out of me the first time. It scared the absolute shit out of me the second time and the third time. So every time, and now I'm a little bit better, but it's still for me like a really big challenge to really let go and just go with it. But I can imagine that these experiences can have a really beneficial effect in preparation for childbirth. I
Mm.
can really imagine.
But you know what? Like, I've done hundreds, if not thousands, of ceremonies, and
Yeah.
sometimes it still scares the shit out of me because it's almost like your system, as you commit to the journey, even before you take any medicine at all, your system knows, or your
Mm,
ego knows it's going to get its ass kicked. Something is going to shift, something is going to change, something's going to come to the light, and it might be really pleasant and it might not be. And I think it's actually a very beautiful, humble way of, or it teaches humility, let's put it that way.
yeah.
It teaches us, again, what we said earlier, that control is a bit of an illusion, and it really brings us very much back to our roots and to the nature of things, the nature of the universe. And that's, of course, because birth also, I feel like, is one of the rawest things there is, right? It's really, a woman that I was working with once told me it really felt like Mother Nature was working through me. It's like this
Wow.
Pachamama's raw power was just taking over my body. And I thought that was such a cool and beautiful image,
Yeah.
because also there you just don't, like, your body just does the thing. And I recently actually learned in a course that I did around hypnobirthing
Hmm.
that there's women, for example, that are paralyzed that can still give birth because their body just does it. Like, they don't have to be able to move in a certain, their body just does its thing. So again, yeah, it is really like that. It's not a different substance that takes over your body,
Hmm.
but it's sort of Mother Nature herself
Yeah. Yeah.
that really takes over control and humbles you and puts you in your place, and at the same time shows you your magnificence and your power, and you go out of it extremely humbled and extremely empowered at the same time. And it's also a space where you're feeling so vulnerable, probably the most vulnerable you'll ever feel, and at the same time, the most empowered. If you, of course, what we discussed in the beginning, get to have some sort of agency, some sort of say over how the birthing process goes.
Yeah.
And I see this over and over again in my work as well, is that the most picture perfect birth on paper can actually feel traumatizing to a woman if she feels like her boundaries or her wishes are not being heard, not respected, and vice versa.
Hmm.
A birth that on paper looks super intense, we're like, oh man, I'm sure this woman will have some sort of birth trauma after going through this, can actually be remembered as something really beautiful, really empowering, simply because she felt supported by the people around her and people were listening to her and trying to support her in the best possible way. And again, that very much ties back into what I try and do with my work, is to provide exactly that space for women where they feel that support and where they feel like they're being heard, feel like they're being listened to, and being helped in the best possible way. Um, because it's such a vulnerable and such a delicate and such an intimate process.
Yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful, and I think the association that you have while going through this is like um, gives the actual results. So in itself, the experience by itself, or what you see on paper, it is just not a good replica of what is really happening to the woman, and how she remembers her birth story later. Um, I just really wanted to ask you one other question. I'm so curious about it. You said in ceremony, in preparation for for childbirth. What is your take on ceremony and plant medicine within pregnancy, within the preparation of childbirth, within the postpartum period? What is I am so curious because this isn't talked about really ever. So I'm really
Mhm.
curious about your take about this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I sat in ceremony not necessarily in preparation for birth, but as I was giving birth, I realized like, oh, this really prepared me for it.
Hmm.
But of course, if we talk about ceremony or any sort of consumption of psychedelics, be it as a microdose or a macrodose or a mini dose or whatever, during pregnancy and during breastfeeding and the postpartum periods, it's of course a very delicate topic and one that's also governed very much by personal choice and preference. We already spoke a lot about, let's say, the indigenous perspective today. So, how tribes have been doing it for hundreds, thousands of years. And of course, these tribes that are native to the lands where these medicines grow. Um, and there, so to take on that perspective, psychedelics and pregnancy have coexisted for thousands of years. And it's not uncommon for women to even have full dose experiences with plants and fungal medicines during pregnancy, during breastfeeding, and even during childbirth. So when I was in the Amazon, for example, I saw many women, pregnant women, drinking medicine in ceremony. I saw children drink medicine. So there, it's a completely different culture, uh, and there's completely different sort of perspectives on this. And so one could say that if these tribes have been undergoing such practices for all this time, they would have probably stopped a long time ago if they would have found it to be harmful to mother and or baby. But it's of course not that simple in our modern world
Hmm.
because there is no scientific research, which is something that, of course, our modern society is very much based on when it comes to opinions that are spread and things that are communicated to be okay or to be useful. And it makes sense that there's no scientific research because it would be absolutely unethical to do so, to conduct.
Hmm.
Um, but there is actually lots and lots of anecdotal evidence of women that have reported their personal experiences and keep reporting their personal experiences of working with plants and fungi during pregnancy. But it's very much up to every individual to decide what to make of that. There's a lot of initiatives also um, by organizations and individuals, such as I think James Fadiman was recently advocating a project where they were collecting a lot of anecdotal evidence for women that had worked with mushrooms during pregnancy and breastfeeding and childbirth even.
And what
But
was
yeah,
its name?
that's just individuals
Yeah.
speaking about their individual experience. But technically speaking, there seems to be no significant toxicity to these substances that could harm the child, as for example is the case with alcohol, even sugar. So yeah, looking at that, one might argue that eating a Snickers bar is actually way more harmful than taking a macro or even a microdose of magic truffles, for example. But um, and also not to forget that in our society, it's completely normalized to take all kinds of medication and eat all kinds of junk food during pregnancy that we know for a fact, also scientifically speaking, is harmful to the child. And don't get me wrong, I totally understand that there's situations in which it might, in fact, be worse to stop taking certain medications during pregnancy, and that might have way stronger negative impacts on the baby in the belly. I just want to offer that perspective that there's a lot of things in our society where one thing is okay, but simply because it's been a part of our culture for so long, like alcohol. I
Hmm.
mean, not that people advocate to drink during pregnancy, but it's just something that's very much accepted. Nobody really blinks if alcohol is had on a regular basis, and then taking a microdose of truffles is super edgy. even though it's sub hallucinogenic, sub perceptive
Mhm.
in its working.
Mhm.
Um, but what's so important to notice is that in this context, your baby, of course, experiences everything that you experience, right? So, meaning any strong process that comes up, your baby is also a part of that, and that's not per se a bad thing, because we can't shield our children from the reality of the world, and that's also not the point. And for instance, feeling sad or getting angry every now and then during pregnancy is totally normal. Um, but we do know that, for example, let's say a mother that loses a loved one during pregnancy causes a certain imprint on that child, because the child also feels that grief. There's actually another person that I would love to recommend for our listeners, and maybe also for you if you haven't heard about her, check out. Her name is Anna Heil. She's Dutch, actually, and she's done a lot of research around the imprints that pregnancy and also birth have on us as people for the rest of our lives. She's also got a lot of really beautiful podcasts out, both in English and Dutch.
Mm.
So it's definitely one to sort of check out when it comes to that field.
Yeah.
Um, but I would say if you're not at all familiar with the practice, the worst time to begin would be during pregnancy. And if you are familiar, I believe you have all of the tools and all of the knowledge to decide for yourself if you would like to continue and whether it would be helpful or not. And maybe just to give a little bit of context, sort of having read a lot of literature around these indigenous practices, also having read also some of these anecdotal stories from women, and why they would even choose to do so in the first place. Um, Microdosing, for example, microdosing psilocybin, because that's something that's very much legal here in the Netherlands and available, is to, for example, support mental health. Because we already spoke about this at length, is that during pregnancy and especially also the postpartum period, we can feel mentally very shaky and very much not at ease with the emotions that are coming up. There's women that develop postpartum depression, for example, and that's something that um, based on these stories, microdosing has helped a lot of women with, to manage anxiety, so anxiety of becoming a mother, anxiety of making that tradition, um, and of course these, for example, depressive symptoms, one might argue, might also have a super negative impact on the well-being of the baby and the families. Um, and then women, so that are mothers, often feel like these practices help them tune in with in the present moment more, and just be more in the moment with their children, with their babies. It might also support this matrescence, this puberty that mothers undergo, to really connect more mindfully with their emotions, with everything that comes up, and and maybe also very practically to manage things like brain fog, which is quite common, the pregnancy brain, to find more clarity and focus again, and and sort of have an option to work with that, with a substance that has low or no toxicity. But yeah, of course, also why would women not do it is if they've never done it before, if they're unsure of the effects, definitely an absolute no go. Maybe also if they're already feeling overwhelmed, because I think we spoke about this at length now, is that these substances are somewhat unpredictable in the way that they unfold in the moment. So you could have had 100, 1,000 ceremonies, and every time it would play out differently. And also with microdosing, I mean, of course, these amounts are. I don't like the term subperceptual so much, because that basically means you don't feel it, and of course the point is that you induce some sort of state shift. So, for example, into a state of more focus or more creativity or more emotional availability. But it's sub hallucinogenic, so you're not tripping out. You can just do whatever you're doing on a regular day under the influence of a microdose. But if you're already feeling overwhelmed and then suddenly you're even more in touch with those overwhelming emotions, might not actually be beneficial. And also, if you're generally just feeling unsure and uncomfortable around, potential effects it might have on the baby, then just stay away from it, and not just don't just try it because somebody else said it was helpful to them. But I think, the female intuition is so strong, and I feel like especially during pregnancy, it's heightened even more. So again, I think if you have sort of worked with such substances before, then you have all the information you need and all the sort of touch points to know whether this is something that might be for you. And if not, then stay away from it. And when we talk about microdosing or macrodosing during um, breastfeeding, then I would say the same applies. But um, because of course everything that you consume ends up in your milk as well. But of course, here you have the choice to, for example, avoid having any residue being passed on to your child by what they call pumping and dumping. So pumping your milk and then just not feeding it to your baby until you know the effects or the residues of a certain substance that you've taken have come out of your system, come out of your body. Some women do that also if they, let's say, want to have a glass of wine, and then they pump beforehand and then they feed their baby the milk that or maybe they feed some sort of um, alternative product in the meantime, and then start breastfeeding again the moment they know the alcohol is out of their system. So that's something that is the advantage of, let's say, using such things during breastfeeding, because then you really have the choice whether it ends up in your child's system or not, which you don't have during pregnancy because, yeah, I mean, you're sharing a body.
Yeah. It's such a beautiful answer, and it's really interesting to hear it from you, and the pros and cons of taking it or taking it or don't taking it. Um, but it's weird because it's such a taboo, and I really never hear someone about this topic. But why why wouldn't we just talk about it? It's not that we are doing anything yet, but if we talk about it, we can make like informed choices. But if we are not talking about it, with this is the same with every experience we have. If we don't talk about pregnancy, we can't really make choices about pregnancy. If we don't talk about childbirth, we can't make our own choices, or it's like less informed choices. And you told us already during this podcast multiple times that knowledge is power. So if we are well informed, we can make better choices. And I had a discussion once a couple of months ago with someone, and she told me, yeah, it makes no sense in prepping for childbirth because it will always be different. It will never what you it will be never what you expect of it. But it's really weird because when you prep, you can you can inform yourself about the things that can happen or the things you can do yourself, but you will also be way more empowered by going through these experiences. And of course you can't really know what you're going to go through, but you can prep yourself, and then it's so much easier to let go in the moment. But to also, if it's really difficult to let go, you can and you like train like couples or like childbirth partner or whatever. You can like get advice of someone, or someone can like guide you within, and you it's far um, better to let go than when you're not informed and you get like in this anxiety state, or like in this freeze state, or your whole nervous system just shuts down. Yeah, I think information is really power. So thank you for that answer.
Yeah, 100%. Just 2 points I want to make there
Yeah.
is, first of all, I think when we think about preparation, it doesn't mean that we're planning
No.
for a certain situation to play out in the exact same way that we imagine. Because also, for example, you mentioned birth plans earlier. The point is not that I'm planning out my birth and saying, oh, this is exactly how it's going to go. I'm just saying, this is what I envision for it. And if this happens, then I would like to react to it in this way. If that happens, I would like to react to it in this way. But also, then you don't know if in that moment you might make a different choice, and that's also okay. But if you don't even know what your choices are,
Yeah.
it's hard
Yeah.
because I see it over and over again that, for example, with an epidural, which is quite common, right? So um, pain medication that's applied into your spine during birth. and uh, and in Dutch it's called a rugprik, and then people kind of assume like, oh, it's just a little puncture into your back, into your spine, and that's it, and then I don't feel any pain anymore. But if you don't inform yourself, you don't realize that you're constantly connected to a CTG heart monitoring device. You get a catheter. You can't walk anymore. You won't feel your contractions anymore, and that's fine. And it's not to say that you shouldn't choose for that, but if you're going to choose for that, then better know upfront what that means and what that entails.
Mhm.
And if you're giving birth, that's the last moment you want to think about these things. And you want to sort of, you probably won't even be able to comprehend. You're in such a different bubble. Even if somebody talks to you and explains all these things to you, you probably won't be hearing it. You won't be able to comprehend. And the last thing you want to do is switch on
Yeah.
your prefrontal cortex, your logical part of your brain, to think about, do I want that or not?
Mhm.
So that's really something you should be doing upfront.
Yeah.
And um, to the point about not talking about these things, so not talking, for example, about plant medicine um, and use during pregnancy, during birth, I think it's an issue of stigma most of all, and especially pregnancy and motherhood and parenthood, fatherhood also, is such a delicate topic. And it's funny because, and I think a lot of mothers will be able to relate to that. It almost feels like as soon as you become pregnant, everyone around you suddenly seems to have an opinion around what you're doing, what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing, how you should be behaving, how you shouldn't be behaving, what you should be eating, shouldn't be eating. And then also, as soon as you have your kid, how you should be raising or shouldn't be raising your child. And you just constantly become, um, yeah, first of all, like an object of projection, but also of criticism. And no matter what you do, if you're not breastfeeding, then you're doing it wrong. If you're breastfeeding for too long, you're doing it wrong. If you're not going back to work, then you're just kind of some kind of like lazy stay-at-home mom. And if you go back to work too early, then you're not serious about being a mother, and you're not taking care of your children well, and you're going to traumatize them for the rest of their lives. It almost feels like you can't get it right. And then, especially with a topic that's still so stigmatized in our society, and I'm just saying in our society because, of course, like I said, for these tribes, it's the most natural thing, right? It's been a
Mhm.
part of their culture forever. And certain things that we do, they kind of look at, and that's normal.
Mhm.
Every sort of, like, let's say, human community, no matter how big or small, has their rituals, has their sort of agreed upon rules, and some things that we consider normal, other cultures and other tribes don't consider normal at all, and vice versa. I think even if you cross the border over to, let's say, France,
Mm.
if you look at birthing culture there, or for a matter of fact, all kinds of different topics, they'll have a completely different take on it, and that's fine. Um, but I think what makes it so difficult to talk about these things is that it creates a lot of area for criticism and projection, and in times where people just get canceled all the time for all kinds of random things.
Mhm.
I think it takes a little bit of courage also for women to speak up and to say, yes, I did that, or um, I don't think that's so much of an issue, and my child turned out well. And it's just this thing of like what's considered normal and what's not. Because again, there's even people nowadays still that will encourage you to whatever, drink a glass of wine during pregnancy. Why not? Like it helps you relax, and um, it's not so bad for the baby, when actually we know for a fact that babies simply aren't able to process alcohol. Like it's
It's a toxin. Yeah.
pure poison for them, and their bodies aren't able to process it. I mean, it's poison for our
Bodies as
adult
well.
bodies
Yeah.
as well, but at least we can process it. And for them, and we see also the effects that it can have. I mean, there are children that are born um, from mothers that have continued to consume alcohol throughout their pregnancies, and they're heavily damaged. And of course, the damage is bigger if you drink on a regular basis, but also one glass of wine has an effect. And yeah, I think that's really where the problem lies. Like, what's considered normal by society, and what's considered weird or edgy or freaky, and to step up and say, hey, I've done something, or I'm doing something that is maybe not so well known and considered dangerous, and irresponsible by other people, even though there's no real evidence that it is. It takes some guts, and I'm not trying to downplay this at all, by no means, because these substances are intensely powerful and they're absolutely not to be messed with. Um, but the same goes for sugar, the same goes for alcohol, the same goes for caffeine, the same goes for so many things. The same goes for a ton of medication that's out there and that's just over the counter even.
Yeah.
And but these are things that are considered normal by society. So I think that's just an important point
Yeah.
to keep in mind,
Yeah.
that it's not necessarily always about the thing itself, but how it is viewed
By
in our
society.
cultural context.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Are there still things, or things you'd like to say to our audience, or things that come in mind right now about this subject, or like the subject of conscious pregnancy, childbirth, whatever, name it, biohacking, whatever you want to say? Um, now's the time.
Now's the time. I think when we're talking about conscious conception and birth, the one mantra maybe, that, and it's so simple and so powerful, but that I want to sort of leave you and our listeners with, is that mama knows best, and if mama feels well, all is well. And I think that's really at the heart of it, because, like we said before, you as a mother, you're sharing your body, you're sharing your aura, you're sharing your field, you're sharing everything with your child for these 9 months. And even afterwards, again, Kimberly Ann Johnson calls it the baby mother bond, I believe.
Mhm.
She has a specific term for this, that even when the umbilical cord is cut, the energetic cord isn't cut. And the baby's nervous system and the mother's nervous system, and not just the mother's, but especially that of the baby and the mother, but also the baby and other caretakers around it, are so incredibly intertwined still. And in a culture where, pregnancy and birth and motherhood kind of happens as a little side hustle, as we said before, it's just important to remind ourselves of that, is of how much of an essential role the mother plays, and how much we can do for the child that's about to be born or that's growing in somebody's belly by just taking care of that person. Um, because that is really where, the body of the mother is the baby's home. It's the baby's universe almost. Um, and in that also, the mother is incredibly in tune and connected and in sync with that baby. So I see this over and over again as well, where the mother just has a sense, it's just like, oh, I feel like something is off. I feel like I should be doing this, I should be doing that, or I shouldn't be doing this, shouldn't be doing that. And then these nudges, these intuitions are overridden by, for example, medical procedures. It's like, oh, no, 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 it's not really safe. You should not do that. You should not listen to that. And or even just at a very simple level, that mothers are just expected to go on as normal and live their lives as if they weren't pregnant, while their body is making a whole human on the side. So I think really putting the birthing person at the center of attention again, doing as much as we can to provide them with care, provide them with open arms, open ears, to really give them the space to do, yeah, arguably the most important work that there is, and to take them seriously in this journey, to take them seriously, even if they act like teenagers again,
Mhm.
is so, so, so important. So I think that's the one thing that I would like to emphasize as we round off our conversation.
Yeah. Beautiful. You have shared so much of your wisdom, and especially for me, who isn't currently pregnant, who haven't had any children. It's really interesting to know so much about this from another perspective, and yeah, to prep already. But I love this conversation so much, and I think a lot of women will find this so helpful and so informative. So thank you for your words. Where can people find you, and where can people find more about your work?
Thank you so much for the invitation. And I'm also happy to hear that you're no longer thinking of your sister as your potential surrogate mama,
Mom.
and that you're at least now in this at this point where like, oh, it might
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah, might
Might be able
happen.
to do this.
Yeah.
So it's good to hear. And yeah, the best way to find me is either via my website, so annaheil.com. I can probably link it in the show notes,
Yeah.
or via Instagram. There you can find me at Anna Heil. And there I share a lot about my work as a doula, my work as a ceremony facilitator. In that field, I offer one-on-one work. I offer group ceremonies and also offer retreats. More about our retreats, which feature extensive preparation and also integration work afterwards, which I believe is absolutely key to having a serving experience, because the experience itself it's just the tip of the iceberg, right?
Yeah.
To really get the most out of it and to sort of like get those gems or those golden nuggets out of it, you need to know and take the time to integrate it into your day-to-day life. That's really where the magic lies.
Mhm.
Um, you can find more information at www.entheogenesis.nl. Um, so those are my offerings currently. And for doula work, I'm available around the Utrecht region
Yeah.
here in the Netherlands. I mean, it's always at the risk of whoever hires me. If I've also had clients that are an hour and a half drive away from here, but of course, then I can't guarantee that I'll be on time,
Yeah.
especially if it's not a first time birth,
Mhm.
because subsequent birth tend to happen way faster.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh, Again, not always. It's a black box. Um, but yeah, that's where you can find me,
Yeah.
and I'm super excited also to answer any additional questions anybody might have. Just reach out. I always love connecting to people around these topics. And as you might have heard, I'm very passionate about
Yeah, about this work.
both ceremony
Yeah.
work as well as birth work, biohacking, any of what we talked about today.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for giving me the stage and inviting me for this beautiful conversation. I really love the questions and kind of jamming with you on all of these topics.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'll put everything in the show notes so people can navigate to your sites, your websites, etc. Thank you.